America's industrial power runs on water that flows from Canada. 40 million people and entire Midwest cities depend on rivers, locks, and treaties most have never heard of. In 2025, decades of quiet cooperation cracked. What if control over America's future isn't in Washington but across the border? The answer begins where geography shapes destiny. In 1909, the United States and Canada signed an agreement that would quietly shape the destinies of both countries for generations. The Boundary Waters Treaty laid out strict rules for how water could move across the border, aiming to stop either side from harming the other through diversion or pollution. At the heart of this arrangement sits the International Joint Commission, with 3 commissioners from each country meeting as equals and empowered to approve or block any project that might affect water levels or flows. Their decisions are binding and their mandate stretches from the Great Lakes down to smaller rivers and streams. The treaty's language is clear. Neither country can use or obstruct boundary waters in a way that injures the other. Canada, with roughly 20% of the world's surface fresh water within its borders, holds a massive share of these resources. But the Commission ensures that geography does not automatically translate to unchecked control. Every dam, canal, or diversion along the border must pass through this legal checkpoint, making the Commission a quiet but powerful referee in North America's resource game. Iron ore leaves the port of Duluth, Minnesota, traveling more than 2,300 kilometers through the arteries of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway before reaching the steel mills of Pennsylvania and Ohio. Each year, more than 200 million tons of cargo, iron ore, grain, coal, and manufactured goods move through this system, supporting the factories and cities that define America's industrial heartland. The Seaway itself is a chain of 15 locks, 13 of them operated by Canadian crews guiding ships past the natural obstacles of the Niagara and Detroit rivers. These narrow passages act as critical choke points where a single halted lock can strand hundreds of vessels and delay the flow of raw materials to entire regions. Hydroelectric plants along the route generate nearly 25 gigawatts of power, enough to supply millions of homes and businesses on both sides of the border. Beneath the surface, unseen operators monitor water levels, manage traffic, and respond to emergencies in real time. Their decisions ripple outward, affecting water supplies for 40 million Americans and the economic pulse of the Midwest. Tensions over shared water resources reached a new level in 2025. In late January 2025, a visit to the Haskell Free Library, a building that straddles the border between Quebec and Vermont, drew headlines. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem reportedly crossed between the countries several times, each time calling Canada the 51st state. Early that year, Canadian mayors found themselves left out of Great Lakes Day in Washington, a break from tradition that many read as a diplomatic slight. Around the same time, the White House floated the idea of abandoning the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty, hinting at using water as a bargaining chip in ongoing trade disputes. President Trump made an offhand remark about a very large faucet in British Columbia that could solve California's drought, which only added to the sense of uncertainty. By March 2025, the United States had paused negotiations over the Columbia River Treaty, the pact that governs hydropower and flood control in the Pacific Northwest. Decades of careful cooperation suddenly looked fragile, as political rhetoric threatened to override the legal safeguards that had kept the water flowing for more than a century. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford stepped in front of the microphones in March 2025, flanked by advisors and energy officials. He announced a sudden 25% surcharge on electricity exports to Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. The numbers were impossible to ignore. In 2023, the United States had purchased $3.2 billion in Canadian electricity, while selling back only $1.2 billion. Ford argued the surcharge was fair compensation for years of imbalance, but the move landed like a thunderclap in Washington. Within hours, President Trump ordered tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel, doubling rates to 50%. The message was clear. Energy and metals were now bargaining chips in a cross-border standoff. State governors in the Midwest scrambled to assess the fallout. Michigan's power grid, already stretched by winter demand, faced the prospect of higher prices and possible shortages. Manufacturers in Buffalo and Detroit watched nervously as costs ticked upward. Canadian exporters, meanwhile, braced for layoffs and plant slowdowns as American tariffs bit into profits. In Ottawa, officials warned that escalating the dispute could threaten the integrated grid that kept both economies running. Emergency meetings unfolded on both sides of the border, with negotiators racing to contain the damage before it spread to other sectors. The standoff lasted just days, but it was enough to expose how tightly America's industrial heartland is bound to Canada's natural resources. For a brief moment, electricity and metals became weapons in a diplomatic contest, turning the invisible wires and pipelines beneath the border into levers of power. When both sides finally backed down, the lesson was unmistakable. Geography and infrastructure are not just background details, they are the real currency of cross-border negotiation. September 2023 brought a surprise few had predicted. For the first time, the United States became a net exporter of electricity to Canada. The reason was not politics or trade disputes, but drought. Canadian hydropower, usually a reliable engine for cities from Montreal to Toronto, faltered as water levels dropped across Quebec and Ontario. Grid operators on both sides watched as the balance of power quietly shifted. Imports that once made up 11% of New York's electricity supply fell to just 2% by August 2025. In New England, the drop was nearly as steep, falling from a historical average of 14% down to 5%. On 86 separate days through August 2025, power flowed north instead of south, with American plants supplying Canadian demand. The grid itself, built for cooperation, allowed these reversals to happen smoothly, but the underlying cause was harder to ignore. Climate, not diplomacy, had changed the rules. Behind the scenes, teams of engineers and system operators worked around the clock, rerouting flows and balancing supply. Their goal was simple: keep the lights on no matter which way the current moved. The episode revealed a reality often overlooked in debates about leverage and control. Geography may give one side an advantage, but nature has the final say. Drought does not respect treaties or trade deals, and a system built for shared benefit can just as easily expose shared risk. The lesson was clear: no country holds all the cards when the weather decides to play its own hand. The legal battle over the Arctic is more than a question of maps or national pride. It is about who has control over the future of global trade. Canada insists the Northwest Passage is part of its internal waters, granting Ottawa full authority over who may use the route and under what terms. The United States, along with most maritime nations, argues the passage is an international strait, open to all ships under the rules of free transit. The stakes are enormous. As Arctic ice thins, the route could cut more than 7,000 kilometres off the journey between Asia and Europe. Shipping executives calculate that the shortcut could save billions in fuel and reduce transit time by weeks. China has called itself a near-Arctic state and has begun investing in polar research and lobbying for access, hoping to establish a foothold in the region. For diplomats and commercial interests alike, the question of who sets the rules in the Arctic will shape the future of global trade, and it is becoming one of the most valuable prizes in international law. Patrol vessels cut through Arctic waters under a sky streaked with satellite trails, their crews scanning for signs of unauthorized passage. In August 2025, the US Coast Guard quietly tracked 2 Chinese research ships as they edged close to Alaska's northern coast, their route hugging the thinning ice. Canadian icebreakers held station nearby, signalling that the days of unchallenged transit were ending. Ottawa had just committed $7 billion to a new fleet of heavy icebreakers, aiming for a year-round presence in the Northwest Passage by the early 2030s. Arctic planners in both countries now spoke openly about the need for constant surveillance and rapid response. With a 5,500-mile border, most of it remote and unguarded, the challenge was not just legal, it was logistical. The investments on both sides told a clear story. Whoever controls the Arctic routes controls the gate to a new era of global trade, and neither country is prepared to leave that power untested. Geography doesn't negotiate. Today, America's core industries run on resources shaped by borders, not by politics. As climate volatility and global competition grow, invisible lines on the map decide real power. The future isn't just about treaties, it's about understanding who actually controls the tap. What do you think?